Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mike. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to the organizers to be here. As an architect and an urban planner in private practice, my job is to imagine the future. It's a nice job to have. And it's also to design places that will attract people, whether they are there to live, to visit, or to work. And in the course of this presentation, what I'd like to do is two things. First, describe some of the principles, the design principles that I've found helpful to achieve successful places, to attract business, to raise land value. And second, to describe some of the modeling techniques that we use to bring evidence and analysis to bear on the creative design process. These are models which, was mentioned, were originally developed at University College London 30 years ago, and are now being used all over the world. Some facts about the value and the impact of mobility first. The cost of driving and the benefit of walking and cycling. And I just want to cite some recent research looking across the EU at the impact of the different modes of transport, giving us, if you like, an economic reason for shifting from a car-based culture that Chris described so well earlier, to one based on active travel. And shifting, creating great surpluses, whether you shift from driving to walking or driving to cycling, that there are economic benefits of doing so. So why don't we just do that? Why don't we just design walkable places? Streets, as Matthew's just described, where we can access them on foot or by bike. Well, we have to recognize that there is a huge inertia in the mind of architects and urban planners. I, like almost every other architect, have been educated that streets are the first of the paradigms that Matthew described. Dirty, noisy, smelly, polluted, unsafe. And so I've been educated in the culture of the enclave, of the shopping mall, of separating people from the street. Streets are for driving. So this is what you have to know as economists. Most architects don't do streets. They do this. This, as Peter showed yesterday, the plan voisin of Le Corbusier is still held by many architects of a certain age, of about half a century and older, as being an ideal. Maybe the younger architects are going to change things, but the older architects hold the power. So they believe this is the way to build cities. And they say the plan voisin, it's, we're all good Europeans, despite what you think. Voisin is neighbor. It's the neighbor plan. It's the plan for making neighbors. No, it's not. It's the plan of the Voisin Motor Company, which sponsored this plan. Back to the economics of cities. Cities have been built to support the motor industry. This is actually Le Corbusier's Voisin, his own Voisin, the architect of the plan Voisin. And it reveals a great deal about our priorities. And as a result, we have built towns that divide people. This is one of the British new towns. The housing is in small, fragmented blocks, separated by fast highways from the next housing area. Now, those highways are green, they're parkland, but this is the conceit, that the carbon generation of the cars is offset by the carbon capture of the trees. It's perhaps a nil-sum game, but it separates people. And in the middle of this town is a shopping center, so that when you walk, you barely see anyone. This is the reality of the model of development that has prevailed for nearly a century. Contrast that with the model of development that prevailed for the previous 9,900 years of urbanism, which is the historic town and city center. And without reading too closely, we could imagine that this might be in England, it might be in France, it might be in Germany or Italy or Austria. It's one of the great creations of European urbanism, the connected street network that Matthew's just described so well, the continuously connected street network, in which, and I deliberately chose a normal, everyday street. This is normal, everyday. I could have chosen the Ramblas or the Champs-Élysées as great urban streets, but I just chose this average high street, where you are always going to be with other people. And the act of going to the shops, to go shopping, is an act of social benefit as well. You spend more time talking to people on the way to the shop and the way back from the shop than you do shopping. So there are great social benefits. And for me, the future is to move from the fragmented city of disconnected developments on the left to the integrated city of continuously connected neighborhoods. And the way to do that is to put streets at the heart of the town. And this is what we've been doing in practice with my company Space Syntax, working with other architects, including here Norman Foster, creating streets around which we place shops and offices, repeating the 9,900-year-old safe formula of the city, and attracting business, large and small, and public spaces. Streets and public spaces are the DNA of successful money-making urbanism. This is the Broadgate financial district in London. We were told that the British would not sit in public spaces. We like to be in pubs. This place in the 1980s broke the mold and showed that even the British could sit outside. And so over those last 30 years, my practice has been involved, if you can see just in the pale red there, in projects all over central London and indeed across Europe and the world. Not only in the financial district, where the values are high, but in the surrounding areas of the smaller creative businesses that surround the financial core of London and are beginning to move into the City of London. Now, we've been able to make designs on the basis of imagination, but also of analysis. And key to our techniques is a spatial modeling technique which identifies the hierarchy of the street network, uses color from the hot red, highly connected, highly accessible streets, then the orange, then the yellow, the green, to the blue, which are the less connected, harder to reach streets. The algorithm simulates the human brain as it makes calculations about how I get from where I am to where I want to be. And it chooses not just the shortest route, but the simplest route, the cognitively simplest route that involves the least geometric deviation from a straight line. And we've learned by following people, literally following people, that this is what most of us do most of the time. So these models identify those routes, and through other data sets, such as surveying the numbers of people walking in towns, we can also identify that the highest footfall is where we had the highest level of spatial accessibility. More than that, this is where we find the highest land values in this particular city, which is Darwin, in the Northern Territory of Australia. High spatial accessibility creates high footfall, creates high land value. These are strong correlations that we have found again and again, and is now supported by the academic research worldwide. So that when it comes to imagining the future of Darwin and creating a master plan, we do two things. First, we build the master plan around streets and spaces, around the DNA, the basic DNA, connected streets. We put in a hierarchy of long, connected, straight streets onto which we then place the principal commercial uses, following exactly the guidance that Matthew has just set out. And then a series of smaller, less connected, but still close to the center streets with parks and public spaces. And the second thing we do is we run models. We run, in this case, a land value model that can estimate 3.7 billion Australian dollars of additional land value being created both in the new development of Darwin and in the existing center of Darwin. By connecting our designs, we create new places that work, and we help existing places by connecting both together. And when it comes to assessing development proposals for the same site, the disconnected development on the left, the connected layout on the right, these designs have the same amount of shopping, the same amount of housing, the same amount of office space. The difference is their spatial layout, their street network. And we can calculate the value differences between them. So as we have more data coming from our cities through sensors, through the smart city infrastructure, we can learn more, and we can bring these data sets together in what we call integrated urban modeling, at the base of which is spatial layout, because space influences so much about everything above, about movement, about land use, about, as you'll see in a moment, crime, land value, carbon emissions. Here's a map of the crime pattern of a suburban centre in Australia. The white dots are houses where there's been a break-in, a burglary. The more those streets are spatially isolated, the more crime there is. There are other factors at play, but the spatial layout is key. Spatial layout is key to car dependence and, as a consequence, social isolation. People living alone because their partner has taken the car to work and being lonely. And the cost of that loneliness to our health system is huge. People being prescribed drugs to make them feel better. Now, how can we help through design, through planning, to avoid that cost in the first place? Without these kinds of analytic tools, I want to suggest that it's like we are Galileo in 1610, staring at the moon with little better than our eyes to judge what we're seeing. We need better tools if we're going to understand these powerful relationships between the way we plan and design cities and the social, environmental, and economic impacts of them. And by doing that, and we've seen some of these techniques already, we will be able to far better understand the relationship between how cities work for business, how cities work for residents, and how we plan them. So these are the kinds of tools which we are now offering. They allow simultaneous analysis at a national level, at a regional level, and a local level within the same model. We can be granular to the scale of the individual floor of the individual building. And this is the reality of human existence. People, as they move through cities, don't understand when they cross a crude census barrier between an urban area and what someone has decided is a suburban area. Our elements of spatial definition I'd like to offer are mostly wrong. The levels of spatial definition we work to in the UK and across Europe are generally crude. It's like saying we have black or white and not all of the colors in between. We need to have the full color, the full spectrum of detail to understand truly how cities work. So in the couple of minutes, which I hope I have, I just want to show a real example that's almost happening live right now. I've brought a project we're currently working on to show you how we do this in practice. You may recognize where we are, you may read where we are, it doesn't really matter. We're in the Middle East, and this site here is a former industrial site. It's still actually an industrial site related to the sea, into which small businesses have started to move to take over some of those warehouses you can just make out as the rectangles on the plan. The question is, what should we do for the future? Should we demolish these warehouses and build tall buildings? Or should we learn from what's there and try to grow it? And of course, it's that what interests me. How do we learn and grow? Well, look, we can take a site like this and describe it in very simplistic terms, its length, its breadth, and the total number of square meters of development. What we've done instead, though, if you can just see here, it's a bit faint, I realize, is we've overlaid, in the first instance, the center of London on the site, which immediately made the point to everyone that this is a large site into which we could put the sophistication of London if we understand the sophistication of a major urban city, all of its mixes of land use and wealth and culture. Or Paris. And as we zoom in on Paris, we notice that Paris has, as London, this continuously connected urban fabric, which Matthew mentioned. I'll say it again, a continuously connected urban fabric. It becomes our first design principle. We overlay Rome, and we identify these spines, these pedestrian spines, which are also public transit corridors. They become our second principle. If we're going to build a new city or repair an existing city, we need a continuously connected fabric, and we need spines, or high streets, or main streets, or boulevards. We overlay Amsterdam, and it reminds us about water, the importance of water, the value of water. Whenever I see a site for the first time, I always say, where's the water? Because where there's water, there's money, if you can build buildings that overlook water. Slow water and slow streets, no faster than 30 kilometers anywhere. Next, don't knock the warehouses down, repurpose them. This is a repurposed building we're in right now. Almost every building, I would suggest, in Trento is not being used for what it was originally designed to do. And yet we have a real estate industry which does the opposite. It designs single-use product. Like single-use plastic, we have to get rid of single-use product. So we need to repurpose buildings. And also, repurposing may involve temporary and meanwhile uses. Not a 10-year lease, but a 1-year lease. We need to be able to change quickly and adapt. And we need to see the street not just as a place of commerce, but as a place of culture. The street as a place of art, the street as a gallery. It also helps us repair streets quickly. The artists work quickly. The urbanists take decades. Shade in almost every city of the world, even London, is what we need much more of in order to cool the air and create the conditions in which life can thrive. And the historic towns and cities of the Gulf show us exactly how that's possible in the most extreme of climates, deeply shaded space. And then incremental evolution, not trying to deliver the master plan overnight, but accepting that it will take time. So those are the principles. And then in practice, how do we put it together? We identify the spines. We apply our second design principle. We identify the public transit corridor. We introduce new canals to Amsterdam-ize this peninsula so that people can float to work. We create a green shaded network, intensely shaded streets, and then a series of local centers. We bring it all together as a continuously connected urban fabric, our number one principle. And this is the beginning of what it's looking like. Shaded streets, solar power creating the shade, solar power creating the energy. A virtuous circle of design. And then a monorail system, quick, affordable, to transit the area, running the analytics to make sure that we've got the right amount of connectivity. And then finishing with a plan where those spaces in between are positive spaces, the positive spaces of human life that attract people to work, attract people to live, attract people to visit, not the negative, dirty spaces that so many other architects have been taught to create. I'll leave it as it flows. Thank you very much.